Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting special on Arts, Parks, Health, Aging, and River Committee. I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Buscaino, and we will be joined by our other colleagues shortly. Until we have our until we meet our protocol and have enough members here for votes, we're going to go ahead and move forward on reports for items 1 and 2. Madam Clerk, could you please read the items?
For item 1, you have a city attorney report, a draft ordinance in response to motion of Federal Corrects Parks. This is relative to the amendment of sections 4150 and 6344 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to revise the definition of smoking to include electronic smoking devices and to revise various provisions regarding the regarding the prohibition of smoking in certain places. For item 2, under Council File 1312-04S2, the Chief Legislative Analyst has submitted a report in response to motion of Federal Corrects, where they were instructed to review the policy proposal from the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health relative to e-cigarettes and to report to Council with any actions the city can take to support those recommendations.
Thank you. And I'm going to take items 1 and 2 together, and before we bring up the CLA and the city attorney, I understand we have a list of speakers, some of whom have to leave very shortly. So let me check on something real quick. Okay. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and bring up Jonathan Fielding, Director of LA County Department of Public Health, to speak first because he has to leave. Dr. Fielding, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jonathan Fielding. I'm the Director of Public Health for LA County and the Health Officer, and I'm proud to be your Health Officer for the City of LA. Let me first thank the Arts, Parks, Health, Aging, and River Committee members and the Chair for addressing this important public health issue. Los Angeles has been a public health leader, especially in the area of tobacco control and prevention, and rightly so. Tobacco remains the single greatest killer in our country. Each year, tobacco kills almost 500,000 people in the United States alone. And today we're here to discuss the concern about e-cigarettes and how they may contribute to the use of tobacco. Electronic or e-cigarettes are battery-operated devices that deliver doses of nicotine and other chemicals to the user. Depending on brands, e-cigarettes typically contain nicotine, propylene glycol or glycerol to produce the vapor, flavoring, and various other additives and contaminants. Some brands have candy flavoring, such as chocolate, fruit, and gummy bears, which appeal to children. E-cigarettes were first introduced in the United States somewhere between 2006 and 2007, and since then they have been marketed widely, and we've seen a dramatic increase in the use of e-cigarettes among adult smokers, and particularly among youth and young adults. Data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention indicate that in the span of just 1 year, from 2011 to 2012, the percentage of high school students in the U.S. who had ever used e-cigarettes more than doubled, from less than 5% to 10%. In that same study, of those who'd ever used e-cigarettes, nearly 1 in 10 reported never having smoked traditional cigarettes, thus prompting concern that e-cigarettes may serve as a bridge to traditional cigarette smoking among youth. We're also seeing growing e-cigarette use among middle school students. Results of a national survey found the percentage of middle school students who'd ever used e-cigarettes almost doubled also in the space of just 1 year, from 2011 to 2012. The dramatic rise in e-cigarette use is of great concern to public health officials for at least 3 major reasons, each of which warrants prohibiting their use in public spaces where smoking is currently prohibited. First, safer doesn't mean safe. Although they are less harmful than traditional cigarettes, some e-cigarettes may pose health risks. Despite some marketing claims that they are a safe alternative to traditional cigarettes and a potential quit smoking aid, vapor from e-cigarettes have been found to contain potentially toxic chemicals, including formaldehyde, acrolein, some heavy metals such as nickel, lead, and other toxic substances, as well as volatile organic compounds. Some of the other chemicals found in e-cigarettes, including propylene glycol, the same substance used to make theater smoke, and other flavorings that are recognized as safe food additives, are not necessarily known to be safe when repeatedly inhaled into the lungs over time, as is the case with e-cigarettes. And since many of these chemicals are quite efficiently absorbed from the lungs into the blood, they pose potential health risks for the users and for non-users exposed to the vapor. E-cigarettes do produce secondhand vapor, that is, vapors that others will inhale. These vapors may contain particulate matter and may contain potentially toxic chemicals that may trigger asthma and can irritate the eyes, nose, throat, and the respiratory tract. People in enclosed spaces should simply not be subjected to these risks. The risk to young children and developing adolescents in particular could be significant. In addition, the nicotine solution in some e-cigarettes is sold in a wide variety of strengths that are also unregulated, which means the amount of nicotine in an e-cigarette may vary widely and not be accurately labeled. This raises serious safety concerns because nicotine raises blood pressure and pulse rate, and nicotine has been shown to increase the rate of birth defects among women exposed during early pregnancy. The second major area of concern is the public use of e-cigarettes would lead to a renormalization of smoking, particularly because some cigarettes have deliberately been developed to look like the traditional cigarettes that when used mimic the act of smoking. It's really hard to discern the difference between the e-cigarettes and a regular cigarette. If you look at these, very hard to tell a difference, even if you're right close, and especially at a distance if you're trying to enforce a law, if there are different laws between the two. Some e-cigarettes are marketed by Big Tobacco, which has traditionally had scant regards for the public's health. This raises a grave public health concern because Big Tobacco has lied under oath and obfuscated the truth about tobacco for much too long. Because e-cigarettes are unregulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, tobacco companies can utilize certain media that have long been unavailable to their traditional cigarette brands since a ban on television advertising took place in 1971. They are glamorizing e-cigarette use in their marketing efforts and with celebrities, which enhances the potential for use of e-cigarettes to serve as a gateway to traditional cigarette use, particularly among impressionable youth. Big Tobacco is also securing a larger share of the e-cigarette market. That is likely to encourage dual use of both e-cigarettes and traditional cigarettes, potentially reducing cessation and increasing harm by prolonging use of traditional cigarettes. Our third concern is because of the similarities in physical appearance between the e-cigarettes and traditional cigarettes, we face growing challenges in enforcing existing smoke-free laws and growing confusion about the permissibility of e-cigarette use in public spaces. And this threatens to undermine decades of work to protect the public by denormalizing smoking, by making smoking something which is not a socially acceptable activity. A powerful tool used in tobacco control, changing the social norm and making smoking cigarettes unacceptable, could disappear. This change in social norms have kept children from starting to smoke and has helped motivate adults to make quit attempts. We've made such progress. We're down around 13% overall in smoking in LA County. It would be a shame to see that reversed. E-cigarettes may well have a negative impact on the public's health, even if the harm is reduced for some individuals who switch from traditional cigarettes to e-cigarettes. And it's the broader impact the public health needs to work to prevent. We recognize that some smokers of traditional cigarettes have reported that e-cigarettes are helpful in their efforts to quit traditional cigarette use, and we congratulate them and all other smokers who've been able to quit. However, the strength of the scientific evidence regarding the effectiveness of e-cigarettes in getting smokers to quit in comparison to other proven strategy is still not there. We do not know how e-cigarettes contribute to cessation and are concerned that their use may satisfy cigarette smokers' nicotine addiction and make it more difficult to quit in some cases. So combining the inadequate information about their benefits with the unknown safety risk, we cannot endorse e-cigarettes as a tobacco cessation aid in the absence of approval by the FDA for this use. So until the FDA determines how it will exert its authority over e-cigarettes, the regulation of these cigarettes, these e-cigarettes products, fall mainly in the hands of state and local government. Unfortunately, it could still take years before the FDA decides how to act or the scientific evidence demonstrates the health impact of e-cigarettes, but we can't afford to wait. Other cities in Los Angeles County completed revisions or are in the process of revising their smoke-free policies to address e-cigarette use in their communities. Both Huntington Park and Compton have included e-cigarette use in their definition of smoking, prohibiting vaping in smoke-free areas, including public spaces, workplace, and multi-unit housing complex. Nationally, Utah, New Jersey, Chicago, and New York City, among other jurisdictions, have taken steps to prohibit the use of e-cigarettes in places where smoking is prohibited. Their use is not allowed on airplanes or on Amtrak trains. Los Angeles is making a critical decision on the health of its residents, and Los Angeles has always been a leader in protecting the public's health. We cannot afford to fall behind. Until more evidence is available on the safety of e-cigarette use, on its impact on inducing teens to begin smoking, and on the potential harm to those who may inhale the secondhand vapor from e-cigarettes, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health believes the best approach is a precautionary one. Precautionary approach. And we recommend the city extend its smoke-free requirements to e-cigarettes in all areas that are already smoke-free, including all workplaces. In addition, we must do everything possible to protect youth from the seductive attraction of e-cigarettes. The current trend of rising e-cigarette use in this population could be devastating over the coming decades if it serves as a bridge to the widespread adoption of traditional cigarettes that kill about 1 in 2 who become addicted. We commend the cities for its action in December to protect youth by passing the ordinance requiring e-cigarette retailers to have licenses and restricting the sale of e-cigarettes in a variety of public settings. But more is needed. For all these reasons I presented, we don't want to risk e-cigarettes undermining a half-century of successful tobacco control and perpetuating the nearly 500,000 deaths annually due to traditional cigarettes. The time for leadership in protecting the public's health in Los Angeles is now. So while e-cigarettes may reduce harm for current smokers, the potential harm for the entire population, particularly youth and non-smoking adults, must be addressed. As Dr. Tom Frieden, the director of Center for Disease Control and Prevention, recently stated in the New York Times, quote, "I think the precautionary principle, better safe than sorry, rules here," end quote, with regard to e-cigarettes. I want to thank the public health experts and leading tobacco control researchers for their guidance and insights into e-cigarettes. Those that I've spoken to before presenting to you today include Dr. David Abrams, Dr. Jonathan Samet, Dr. Lourdes Baiconte Garbinati, Dr. Helene Calvé, and Dr. Philip Gardner, all experts in this area. Thank you for your time and considering this important public health issue.
Dr. Fielding, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all of the experts that you mentioned as well for your work on this and enlightening all of us with this important work that you've been doing. Thank you. And Tom, before I want to introduce Tom LaBonge has joined us, and Corinne Price, members of the committee. Welcome, and just to explain, we're also going to hear from our colleagues Paul Koretz, Bernard Parks, and then LAUSD School Board member Steve Zimmer, and then our city attorney. That's in the hopper here, so we can make really brief comments to Dr. Fielding.
Just want to thank one of the greatest public servants in California, Dr. Fielding, for what you do for Los Angeles County on all issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
And as I mentioned before, we are joined today by a few of our other colleagues on the City Council, Mr. Paul Koretz, followed by Bernard Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. There are a lot of reasons why it's critical that we pass this motion. The top priority, of course, is kids. And as Dr. Fielding said, there's an effort to market to kids. You have flavors like cotton candy and chocolate and others that you're not legally allowed to market in terms of tobacco because they know you're marketing to kids. We know there are statistics that show that a lot of the kids that are smoking or vaping these e-cigarettes are not tobacco smokers. So this is actually a gateway to tobacco smoking. And this is critical for the tobacco companies, and that's why I think tobacco companies are buying up e-cigarette companies and getting more involved, because their customers are either dying of natural causes or more frequently from tobacco or related causes, or they're quitting. So they have to replace their customers, and the only good place to replace them is by continuing to addict new smokers. And I believe this is a good backdoor way to do it with these e-cigarettes. So I think it's most critical when we talk about kids. But I know there's an effort to amend this motion to allow e-cigarette smoking among adults. So to allow it, for instance, in bars where you have to be over 21. While I think stopping kids from smoking e-cigarettes is the #1 priority, I think this is a priority as well. And it's because, one, there are a number of chemicals that adults are exposed to. And people may go to bars and you say, well, it's their free choice. It's the same arguments that were made 20, 30 years ago about tobacco. And the people for whom it's not a free choice are the employees. Yes, you can quit your job. You can stop working in a bar. You can stop working in restaurants. As a practical matter, most of them don't. So there were bar employees with emphysema and other related ailments that they got from secondhand smoke that cleared up once all the bars and all the restaurants stopped allowing smoking. It's the employees that are the ones that are the most captive audience. And if we're going to protect the employees in our bars and restaurants, we really need to extend the ban on tobacco smoking to e-cigarettes and make that exist everywhere. There are over 40 cities and counties and states that already include e-cigarettes in their smoke-free laws, and that's all we're asking. I believe that what's the effort to allow e-cigarette smoking in some places is just a way to get around the bans on smoking. And the bans on smoking have not only protected non-smokers from secondhand smoke, they've made a huge difference, as Dr. Fielding said, in changing the dynamic. So people now find smoking an unappealing thing to do, and the number of smokers as a result has dropped to significantly lower numbers. I've worked on this issue for almost 40 years, and I can see it. And this is, I believe, the tobacco companies' sort of Hail Mary to find a way to stop the drop in smoking in places where it's been restricted. We know this is harmful. We just don't know exactly how much and exactly which chemicals, and we don't even know exactly which chemicals are in these e-cigarettes. The question isn't whether they're harmful, the question is how harmful. But if there's any significant harm, why should we be exposing our residents to it? And there may be chemicals that are even more harmful than tobacco. We don't know yet. So I would just say, let's not amend this motion. Let's pass it as it is, and let's take a big step forward and send a significant message to the residents of Los Angeles and far beyond about our seriousness of protecting the health of our residents and ending the habit of smoking that costs so many billions of dollars and so many lives. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Koretz, and thank you for your decades of work on a more smoke-free California. As one of the co-signers of the motion, along with Bernard Parks, I want to thank you for this effort. And I just want to say something. It's been 20 some odd years, I think, that the city of Los Angeles prohibited smoking in the workplace. I worked in a restaurant at that time. I worked in a restaurant that had a smoking section that I had no choice of being in. When the prohibition went into place, we were a smoke-free environment. I am someone who suffers from asthma. I noticed the difference immediately. And so I think it is with a look toward the workers who have no choice but to work where they are, more often than not, that it is their protection and that we need to also have in mind in considering this ordinance. So thank you, Mr. Koretz.
Thank you.
And we're joined by our distinguished colleague, Mr. Bernard Parks.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you having this hearing today on this issue, and appreciate your invitation and when you had the initial news conference where you basically brought that motion forward, one of 3 motions. I'm here today, and many people have already discussed the pertinent notes I have, but I've given you all some light reading. We handed out a package of material, and a couple of things I'd like to cover. First of all, for anyone to say that e-cigarettes are not harmful, I think they are taking us down the same path that the tobacco industry said in 1954 that cigarettes were not harmful, and even through 1999 they were saying the same thing, even though many of their internal chemists were saying they were harmful. Now, tobacco is viewed as the #1 preventive killer in the United States. And I think the issue that we do not want to get in is find out in 10 or 15 years, people misjudged that e-cigarettes were in the same ballpark. And even if people dispute whether the vapor is harmful, which many doctors and Dr. Fielding clearly stated earlier, at the very minimum, nicotine is a addictive drug, and at very minimum, it has a negative impact on your heart. And so if you don't die of cancer, you could die of a heart attack or other heart-related diseases, and the American Heart Association comments on that. I think it also, in dealing with nicotine, is something that is not, should not be dealt with lightly. It is something that anytime we're dealing with addictive behavior and addictive product, it causes other people, young people particularly, to move into that gateway environment of what's the next issue that they're going to confront, whether it's now real cigarettes, tobacco, and the beat goes on and on. I think it's also important that we not lose sight of all of the efforts made in the city about smoking, and that we not lose that ground, but also the secondhand smoke, that we have now pretty good information to show that people who do not smoke are victimized as much as those who do smoke. And as mentioned earlier, employees, people that are family. In my district, we are particularly concerned on secondhand smoke because of the small and older buildings, that you have people with connected air ducts that are smoking in apartment 1 but killing people in apartment 9. And so these are things that I think are important. And Mr. O'Farrell, I mentioned to you before, we have a motion in your committee that deals with secondhand smoke. I think hopefully building on the work of this council in the past, that we should be looking to making much as that this city a smoke-free city as best we can. Individuals that live in this city should not be confronted with secondhand smoke. And I think as we look to the future, it's the only way that we can ensure that we're doing all of the preventive things necessary for our youth and also our senior citizens, who often are captive audiences where people choose to participate in this activity. So I'd hope that we move forward and replicate this ordinance that matches our current smoking ordinances, whether it's where you sell them in certain times around schools, or whether parks, beaches, city buildings are off limits. I think all of those are more than appropriate. And I think it's also one of those things that once we set the tone, it's amazing how self-regulating it is, because the community are the ones that stand up and point out people that are in violation of the ordinances. It's not where people thought initially you're going to have a smoking police in the city. It doesn't require that. You have a very activist group of citizens who do not want to smell smoke, nor do they want to be in close proximity, and they regulate this as well as can be. And I just hope that we move forward on this, and I want to thank Mr. Fuhrer for getting this ordinance done so quickly. That has not been our history in the past. We've often did motions, and many of us have retired by the time motions come forward. So I am pleased that we have this today, and I'd hope that we not alter it, that we move forward, and that we want to be on the safe side. And I don't think we could get a better warning from Dr. Fielding that says you want to be safe than sorry. You do not want to confront your kids and the future, or their kids, and tell them that we could have done something about this, but we chose not to. So thank you. We look forward to seeing this in council.
Thank you so much, Chief. Mr. Parks, thank you. We have another very special guest today with us. We have Los Angeles Unified School District Board Member, Mr. Steve Zimmer. Welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and other distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor to be here. I want to first apologize to you for my relatively informal attire today. You see, I keynoted this morning my first high-tech education conference, and I was told under no circumstances should I wear a tie, or I would not be received well. But I was also told not to shave, but as the only hair above my shoulders I can control is my facial hair, I didn't concede to that. But I tell you the story of my informal attire because I too wanted to fit in today at the high-tech conference, and I did. Maybe they listened, maybe I didn't, but at least I wasn't the only one with a tie.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it looks like Father Stephen Zimmer there with a white collar. I just want to correct.
I didn't want to say it.
But I raise this to say that we all want to fit in, and that peer pressure remains a very, very serious issue amongst our youth. And I, as a school board member, but more importantly, from my previous career at Marshall High School, where the second half of my career was spent as the faculty member who led all of our drug and alcohol and tobacco intervention programs, I'm very, very concerned that e-cigarettes are participating in what I would call a re-hipsterization of tobacco. It's a remarketing, it's a repackaging, and it's very, very dangerous. And I want to make sure that you know from my perspective that this is a marketing, a targeting of youth who are already extremely vulnerable and living in extreme peril. The percentages of asthma and other respiratory diseases that are facing LAUSD youth, 80% of whom live in situations of poverty, is disproportionately higher not only to the state, but wildly disproportionately higher than the nation. These are youth already living in compromised respiratory health because of the environmental factors that are already happening in their neighborhoods, their communities, and sometimes, I dare say, their schools. I want to make sure that I express to you today, it's myself as an individual school board member. Together with my colleague Bennett Kaiser, we'll be bringing a support resolution of this effort to the school board, and I'm confident that we will have their support. We are already exposing our youth to a great number of environmental hazards. We are exposing our youth to a great level of peril in their communities, to and from school. We address these issues all the time. My councilman and friend, Chairman O'Farrell, was at a community meeting in my neighborhood just a few days ago, addressing the tragedy that occurred in front of LeConte Middle School about the hazards of being able just to walk to school in some of our communities and neighborhoods. We want to make sure that we don't do anything that will expose our youth to greater risk of addiction, to greater risk of health compromise, to greater risk of peril. Having combated addiction for over 15 years with students mostly under the age of 18, I assure you from my personal experience, we don't want to do a single thing that provides additional gateways to addiction, any form of addiction. In fact, we want to add more resources to our schools to combat this, not turn the other way as risk increases. And one last note. The chairman noted his own experience working in restaurants. I too am a veteran of the hotel, restaurant, and bar industry as a teenager and as a college student. For a lot of the families of our kids, these are not temporary jobs. These are careers. On a very different motion, we will be coming to you telling you that literally thousands of the parents of our students work in the hotel and restaurant industry. And so I just want to note that when we consider the targeting and when we consider the risks that are involved to our kids from e-cigarettes, there's the direct risk, which has to do with the marketing and the rehipsterization, but there's also the indirect risk to their family. And so I would encourage your support of this intact, because it's the whole family system that's affected when we're not careful stewards of the environment of the city. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
School Board Member Zimmer, thank you so much for your comments and for taking the time out of your day to testify here at City Hall. We really appreciate it. I also want to acknowledge Bennett Kaiser, School Board Member, who has also submitted a letter supporting this ordinance, along with Superintendent John Daisy, who's also submitted a letter supporting this ordinance. Next, I'd like to bring up our City Attorney, Mr. Mike Feuer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Buscaino. So, for the beginning, I'd like to say something about our tobacco enforcement unit in the City Attorney's Office. Nora, Selena, your team, you have been magnificent in this, and all of us in the city owe you a debt. As I sit here, I know that you are wondering how much harm this device could pose in areas that have already been designated smoke-free. The answer to that question is, as you've heard from the county's leading health expert, plenty. And let's talk about that. You heard from Dr. Fielding that we ought to be adopting a precautionary approach, an approach that's based on the assumption that we ought to be protective of public health in instances where there is evidence that it could be challenged. That's an approach that the City Council ought to adopt with this ordinance. You've heard Dr. Fielding talk about the toxics that are contained in the vapor from e-cigarettes. You've heard about the potential for renormalizing the behavior of smoking. And you've heard about the importance of consistent and easy enforcement of our existing rules. But now I'd like to share with you what you can fairly anticipate from the opposition to this ordinance today. Let's go argument by argument through the things that you're likely to hear from them. And let's talk directly and honestly about what the response needs to be. You're likely to hear e-cigarettes release water vapor. They don't release smoke. As Dr. Fielding indicated, the emissions from e-cigarettes contain nicotine, volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, an array of elements that have been determined previously to be carcinogenic. You are going to hear that e-vapor poses no risk to bystanders. Given the content of the emissions from e-cigarettes, are you really prepared to buy into the notion that bystanders exposed to nicotine, heavy metals, volatile organic compounds are not likely to, later on in life, if they're exposed on a continuing basis, contract cancer? I wouldn't make that bet. You're going to hear from the opponents that regulating e-cigarettes is going to discourage people who are smoking from engaging in a less dangerous activity. That's a red herring. This council just permitted 5,000 retailers to sell e-cigarettes in the city of Los Angeles. What is before you has nothing to do whether an individual who's seeking to cease smoking will encounter more difficulty in doing that. They'll have e-cigarettes available to them. They can inhale the emissions from e-cigarettes whenever they wish to do it. All this ordinance would do is restrict the locations in which they could do that. You are going to hear that there are no studies that show that e-cigarettes are dangerous in an outdoor environment. But as Dr. Fielding mentioned, even if, and it's a fact not in evidence, but even if it were determined later on that the emissions from e-cigarettes aren't dangerous to a bystander in an outside environment, the existence of devices like this, as Dr. Fielding indicated, in public places does threaten to renormalize the behavior of smoking. And it was the Centers for Disease Control which noted a doubling in the span of just 1 year in the use of e-cigarettes by high school students and a doubling by middle school students as well. A doubling so that 10% of high school students reported that they were now engaging in the use of e-cigarettes. We cannot allow a continued path toward renormalizing a behavior which we know has been so perilous for our society. The opponents might also say that a former Surgeon General is in opposition to this ordinance. Let's be real with each other. A former Surgeon General who sits on the board of one of the companies that manufactures e-cigarettes, no surprise, indicates his opposition to regulations regarding e-cigarettes. This ordinance before you calls on members of this council to make a choice. Are you going to stand with the independent public health experts like Dr. Fielding? Or are you going to stand with those who derive benefit from, support from, the e-cigarette industry? This ordinance before you is a common sense ordinance. There are strong arguments that defeat every single one of the arguments made by the opponents to what's before you today. This is a moment for the city of Los Angeles to join cities from New York to other cities here in the state of California in being sufficiently cautious to say, given the toxic elements that are contained in the emissions of e-cigarettes, we should be exercising the precautionary principle on behalf of our families here in Los Angeles. Thank you very much for your focus on this issue, Mr. Chair, and all members of the committee, and I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Fewer. Thank you so much. And thanks for all of your work on this and that of your staff as well. Thank you. We're going to call up Mr. Brian Randall, Los Angeles Chief Legislative Analyst for the CLA report on this ordinance proposal. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Brian Randall, Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. Before you is a report initiated by motion O'Farrell-Koretz to instruct the CLA to review the policy proposal from the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health relative to e-cigarettes and report with any actions the city can take to support the recommendations. On October 3rd, 2013, the county released a report on e-cigarettes, which is attachment 2 of the CLA report, which included 3 policy actions that the county recommends to be enacted by local governments. The report before you discusses the 3 policy recommendations and any corresponding actions taken by the city to adopt these recommendations. The first recommendation by the county is to amend local smoke-free policies to include e-cigarette use in the definition of smoking. On January 8, 2014, the City Attorney's Office released a draft ordinance to prohibit e-cigarette use in existing smoke-free areas such as restaurants and government buildings. The draft ordinance is item number 1 on today's committee agenda. The second recommendation is to amend existing tobacco retailer license ordinances to include e-cigarettes in the definition of tobacco product. On December 4th, 2013, the council approved an ordinance to this effect, which would require a tobacco retailer permit for e-cigarettes and prohibits the self-service display for these devices. The ordinance went into effect on January 22nd, 2014. The third recommendation is to impose taxes on e-cigarettes to make retail prices more comparable to those of traditional tobacco cigarettes. The city has not yet taken any action relative to imposing taxes on e-cigarettes. The city attorney has advised that the city does not have the authority to tax cigarettes or e-cigarettes as a tobacco product, as the state currently levies and administers such a tax. It should be noted that the issue of taxing e-cigarettes at the state, federal, and local level is still an open discussion, and a definitive decision has not yet been made whether to categorize e-cigarettes as a tobacco product, a drug, or some other category. The council, with input from the city attorney, may wish to explore options for taxing and/or imposing fees on e-cigarettes, including adopting a resolution to support legislation or a ballot initiative at the state level to allow local governments statewide to tax e-cigarettes and/or institute a statewide tax on e-cigarettes similar to tobacco taxes. We will continue to monitor legislation relative to e-cigarettes at the local, state, and federal levels, and the decision to support legislation at the state level and any subsequent ordinance to enact additional regulations and/or taxes on e-cigarettes within the city is a policy decision of the City Council. And that concludes my report, and I can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Colleagues, are there any questions for Mr. Randall? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for your report. Colleagues, what I'm going to do is we have no comment cards on item 2, which is the report that was just given. Unless there are objections, I would like to approve the report that was just heard, item 2. And we can move on to item 1. No objections, that the report is adopted, and let the record reflect that. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to call up together the following individuals for the special presentation of item 1. And could I please have Ms. Cynthia Hallett, Dr. Michael Ong, Dr. Lourdes Bascon-Garbaniti, and Mr. Timothy Kordick. Up at the table, please. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today and reporting here to this committee. And we're going to begin with Cynthia Hallett. And please, as you start, identify your name for our Madam Clerk. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with the committee today. My name is Cynthia Hallett. I am the Executive Director of Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, a national, member-based, nonprofit advocacy organization working to clear the air of secondhand smoke and prevent another generation addicted to nicotine. Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights supports the proposal to prohibit the use of electronic cigarettes in all smoke-free environments. We believe that this is a worker health and safety issue, given the growing body of science of what is in the secondhand aerosol, or vapor as some say, which is emitted from an e-cigarette. While there isn't as much science on what is in the secondhand aerosol from an e-cigarette as there is about tobacco cigarettes, there is plenty to cause concern, and some of that you heard earlier this morning from Dr. Fielding and other experts. Secondhand aerosol contains volatile organic compounds, ultrafine particles, lead, chromium, propylene glycol, nicotine, and other toxins. Currently, there are at least 108 cities nationally and 3 states that include e-cigarettes as items that are prohibited from use in smoke-free environments, including New York City and Chicago, whose laws will go into effect at the end of April. We cannot and should not wait for FDA regulation, which would likely only regulate the production of the product and not necessarily when and where electronic cigarettes should be used. We are not suggesting, nor would this proposal, if enacted, an outright ban or prohibition on the product. We are merely concerned about the potential health effects of exposure of non-users to the secondhand aerosol. Many of the current studies are based on the constituents of a single cigarette, and we're concerned about the impact of several e-cigarettes in use at the same time, given the increased volume and exposure to these pollutants. E-cigarette proponents will argue that e-cigarettes are safer, healthier, don't create smoke, and help them quit tobacco smoking. It may be true that e-cigarettes in general are less polluting than a tobacco cigarette, but it is also true that there are still pollutants that are in the air from the e-cigarette, and in some cases, those concentrations of some constituents are higher than what are found in tobacco cigarettes. Given the current science base, we should take the precautionary approach and ensure individuals are not exposed to the secondhand aerosol in smoke-free environments. Having been involved in tobacco control for the last 25 years on a national and international level, with my roots here in Los Angeles County, I wanted to share with you what else you might hear from those that are opposed to this sound public health proposal. Based on statements in formerly secret internal tobacco industry documents, we know that the industry cannot win against the public health argument about protecting innocent victims, those who do not use the product, and it cannot legitimately fight the science on the hazards of their product. Tobacco companies are now purchasing e-cigarette companies and are employing many of the same tactics that they did when we first started working on smoke-free laws back in the 90s. One example I heard on the radio when I landed here yesterday were the radio ads by Blue e-cigarette company, which happens to be owned by Lorillard Tobacco Company, and Views e-cigarettes, which is owned by R.J. Reynolds. The Blue e-cigarette ad that I heard yesterday did not identify that the tobacco company was sponsoring it, and I wonder what the public would think if they knew that tobacco companies owned e-cigarette companies. Other political tactics that opposition is using to try to prevent these laws is to try to kill the ordinance or a bill that would prohibit e-cigarette use in smoke-free environments. Or if it can't kill the bill, it will offer weak amendments to the law. Or as a last-ditch effort, it'll try to send something off to a study committee to just delay the passage of this law. One example of weak language that we've seen pop up in other places, but that has been defeated, is to suggest exempting establishments that are open only to adults 21 or older. Again, under the guise that, well, adults can choose where they want to go. But that provision would not protect the workers in those establishments, and no worker should have to choose between a healthy workplace and a paycheck. Another diversionary tactic is to make it personal, to ignore the health effects and health consequences, and to make it about the perceived right to smoke. There is no constitutional right to smoke, and this has been researched by legal experts and refuted. If an adult wishes to use an unregulated product like an electronic cigarette to get their nicotine or sample the flavors, then they're welcome to do so. However, they should not use the product indoors in ways that would harm others. Historically, tobacco companies have established front groups or organizations that appear to be grassroots, but in fact are either set up by or led by former or current tobacco industry employees. If you think back to the Tobacco Institute and the National Smokers Alliance, both were revealed to be complete fronts for tobacco by big tobacco. And today we're seeing a similar pattern across the U.S. One example is the board of SAFATA, the Smoke-Free Alternatives Trade Association. At least 2 of the board members of SAFATA have ties with tobacco companies. And Greg Connolly, former legislative director of CASA, Consumer Advocates for Smoke-Free Alternatives Association, is now a legislative consultant with the Heartland Institute, a group that has long held tobacco industry partners. So, lastly, I can also imagine another argument being about profits. Again, from internal tobacco industry documents, there was a quote that said the financial impact of smoking bans will be tremendous. Just 3 to 5 fewer cigarettes smoked per day per smoker will cost the industry billions. Well, the same's got to hold true for electronic cigarettes, that if somebody can't use the product all day in various venues, then they'll need to buy fewer products, fewer e-cigarettes, fewer nicotine cartridges, and that means less money for the industry. The current proposal by the City of Los Angeles would protect public health from exposure to secondhand aerosol. And really, that's the bottom line. No matter what you hear today, please remember that this is a public health issue. We have enough science to make an intelligent decision that secondhand aerosol is not harmless, that it is a new source of air pollution that contains ultrafine particles, toxicants, and carcinogens. Therefore, on behalf of the members and staff of Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, we urge you to adopt this proposal as originally drafted to prohibit electronic cigarette use in all smoke-free places and workplaces at all times without exception. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hallett. Thank you so much. We're going to next hear from Dr. Michael Ong and Dr. Lourdes Baez-Conde-Garbaniti, and followed by Mr. Timothy Kordick. And I'm going to ask that for the sake of the time that we can limit our comments to a couple of minutes. Will that work for you? Thank you. Dr. Ong.
Thank you, council members, for the opportunity to comment upon your proposed ordinance. My name is Michael Ong, and I am the chair of the State of California's Tobacco Education and Research Oversight Committee, commonly known as TROC. Dr. Baez-Conde-Garbanati is also a member of that committee. This committee oversees Proposition 99, which funds the California Tobacco Control Program run by the California Department of Public Health, as well as the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program run by the University of California, and tobacco education efforts by the California Department of Education. This committee also produces a state master plan for tobacco control and tobacco-related research and makes recommendations to the state legislature for improving tobacco control and tobacco-related research efforts in California. I am also a practicing general internist and an associate professor of medicine at the University of California, Los Angeles. TROC supports the proposed ordinance that would prohibit the use of electronic cigarettes or e-cigarettes anywhere smoking is currently prohibited in the city of Los Angeles. And a letter to that effect has also been sent to all of your offices, and it also has been sent to the city clerk. This proposed ordinance is consistent with laws enacted by 44 cities and counties in California which prohibit the use of electronic cigarettes in some outdoor areas, some indoor areas, or both. This position is also consistent with TROC's official position on electronic cigarettes, adopted at the committee's May 22, 2013 meeting, which simply states, TROC opposes the use of electronic cigarettes in all areas where other tobacco products are banned. TROC took this official position for several reasons. Smoke-free policies protect non-smokers from exposure to toxins and encourage smoking cessation. Introducing electronic cigarettes into clean air environments created by smoke-free policies reinforces the act of smoking as socially acceptable and makes enforcement of existing laws that protect the public from secondhand smoke difficult due to the similarities with cigarettes. Early data has shown that electronic cigarette emissions can contain carcinogens and toxic chemicals which may result in additional potential harm to the public. TROC was particularly concerned by the recent report by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, that the percentage of U.S. middle and high school students who have used e-cigarettes more than doubled from 2011 to 2012, from 4.7% to 10.0%. And in 2012, more than 1.78 million middle and high school students nationwide had tried electronic cigarettes. This CDC study also found that 76% of middle and high school students who had used e-cigarettes in the last 30 days had also smoked cigarettes. With emerging tobacco products like electronic cigarettes on the rise, this vulnerable population needs protection from exposure to these products. For these reasons, TROC supports the City of Los Angeles in its efforts to prohibit the use of electronic cigarettes anywhere smoking is currently prohibited, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this ordinance with your committee today.
Thank you, Dr. Ong. And now we have Dr. Lourdes Baez-Conde-Garbaniti. Hopefully I got that right now.
Garbanati. Thank you. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to speak today. I am Dr. Lourdes Baez-Conde-Garbanati. I am an associate professor in preventive medicine at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. And I am here today not just on my behalf, but also on behalf of my boss, Dr. Jonathan Samet, who is the chair of the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee for the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and also the chair of the Advisory Committee for the Food and Drug Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee. Dr. Samet was also the lead scientific editor on the U.S. Surgeon General's report on smoking and health, and has been so for many, many iterations of that report. I would like to highlight several comments from a letter that you already have from Dr. Samet, which are particularly important. One is that these amendments are necessary basically because of the rapid rise in use of electronic cigarettes. Because use has increased so fast, the scientific evidence on long-term consequences of their use is still limited, and it is greatly controversial over the harms and benefits to the public health from the availability of e-cigarettes. But we do know that the devices deliver a vapor or nicotine electronic emissions, or secondhand aerosol, as others would like to call it, as vapors sound rather innocent. They sound more like it's just water, right? But they do deliver to these emissions to their users, lacking a lot of the toxic compounds that cigarettes originally lacked. So there is a promise of harm reduction, and that is why there's such interest in these cigarettes. But scientific understanding of the consequences of their use is still incomplete. And beyond the possibility of a reduced health risk for some users of e-cigarettes compared to cigarette smokers, the concern is that the availability and the widespread use of these devices will actually increase nicotine addiction among youth and young adults. And you've already heard previously about the concerns related to the use of nicotine. As summarized in the 50th anniversary Surgeon General report, nicotine has adverse consequences beyond its very well-documented ability to cause addiction, and that we know for a fact. Beyond this concern, the overall impact on nicotine addiction, secondhand smoke exposure of these vapors also represents contamination not just to the potential person who's next to the user, but also can be deposited on surfaces where the vapor particles could settle and exist for an unknown period of time. We actually lack quantification on the typical levels of nicotine that will be in the air while e-cigarettes are in use. And it is clear that non-smokers adjacent to people using e-cigarettes will be exposed to a nicotine-containing vapor. That we do know. The Council has received numerous materials addressing the potential risk or harm reduction benefits of these products. I would like to point out, and in particular, one letter that you received from Dr. Richard Carmona, the 17th Surgeon General of the United States. Dr. Samet worked closely with Dr. Carmona in his capacity of senior scientific editor in 2 reports of the U.S. Surgeon General. What we would like to point out is that the Surgeon General's reports are based on a comprehensive review of all existent available evidence that provides conclusions that there is sufficient scientific evidence to meet the highest threshold of scientific evidence and certainty. Given the case of e-cigarettes before the scientific community, the data is lacking, and Dr. Carmona can only offer opinions at this point, but not real evidence, scientifically based conclusions on their role in harm reduction, nor has this been an approved harm reduction device by the Food and Drug Administration. Thus, the Council today is charged with the most critical decision of the public's health, while the scientific evidence on this product is only emerging. On a personal note, I would like to say that I agree with the statements in Dr. Samet's letter, and I would like to highlight that the City of Los Angeles has always been a leader, providing guidance not just to the citizens of LA, but to the entire state and the rest of the country. It is the right thing to do to maintain that leadership. Just imagine that right now, I was listening to the representative from the school board, any teacher or student could light up in a classroom an electronic cigarette, and there is no guidance in that school district at the moment as to what to do and what to tell them to stop. So with that in mind, I urge the committee to continue to provide the citizens of Los Angeles the leadership it has always done in protecting the public health until the scientific evidence is there. This is the right thing to do. So on behalf of the Department of Preventive Medicine at the Keck School of Medicine, Dr. Jonathan Samet and myself, and the Tobacco Education and Research Oversight Committee, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Garbonati. Thank you so much for your report and taking the time to address us today. Next, we have Timothy Kordick from LAUSD Health Education Program.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. I'd like to go first to some real stuff, which is our policy. Just to give you an update as a committee of what's going on in LAUSD in terms of policy. We do have this covered under our policy under paraphernalia. That's where it's currently listed.
And Mr. Kordick, bring the mic a little closer
Yes.
to you, just a little bit.
Yes, and just so I can start, I work with Student Health and Human Services out of Health Education Programs, and I'm in charge of all this policy and surveillance data that we do out of that office. The policy that we do have out of the office comes from us and from legal, and what we do there is we don't mention e-cigarettes yet. We will in the next policy iteration, which is happening right now, but where it is covered right now is in paraphernalia. All right, so I wanted to start there. As part of my job, I'm also in charge of surveillance data for the district. And so one of the things that many times we don't hear about are the good things that we do in our school district. And what we do well is cessation and prevention education. I can tell you because I'm in charge of that data to figure out how our youth are doing with their health behaviors. I can tell you that I got the new findings from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the WIRE-BS, and nationally they are at about 17% of our youth are smoking. In LAUSD, as a school district, it's 7%, approximately. All right, so we are doing a very good job and always have done a really good job around tobacco prevention. I was the tobacco use prevention education advisor for the district a couple years ago, and now I consult with people on that project now. I wanted to talk about the difference between risk reduction, though, and prevention education. All right, remember that we have young kids under 18-year-olds who have never attempted or tried some of this stuff. Many of them have not, even though we hear all the time how it's on the rise. Many still have not. And they are still trying to figure out if they should. One of the differences in risk reduction is that we're dealing with over 18-year-olds many times, and adults, when we talk about risk reduction, we're talking about trying to monitor their risk and trying to manage it. So when they're already assuming they are smokers and users, and they're managing that risk. When you deal with under 18-year-olds and you do prevention education, what we're talking about is teaching kids the skills necessary to be able to negotiate or refuse that type of unhealthy behavior. So the type of things that we teach in schools or in health education through our prevention education, our cessation, is very different than what you would do in a regular college setting in their classes. We talk about role play, we talk about negotiation skills, things like that, the refusal skills that they need to be able to feel confident enough to be able to say no. That's a really important part, because what's happening now is that we have lots of new myths out there about e-cigarettes, and these kids are believing it. We just had a recent report of a middle school child who purchased an e-cigarette from one of the local tobacco shops, right next to one of our schools. So this issue is huge, and part of the problem is that the human development factor here is that their brains are not fully developed. And the reason why we do prevention education is because their brains aren't fully developed. They don't have the capacity to make all the kind of decisions that we make from a level of education, experience, and what have you. Their behavior is impulsive. And so we have to train them using actual processing and skills in our classrooms to be able to do that. All right, so by actually role modeling that by some of our staff in our schools, that is showing the kind of behavior we don't want to see happen. And one of the issues we've had is with staff. One of the issues we've had is that I just got a call the other day from our hazards department because our contractors are saying they want to be able to smoke e-cigarettes in our schools in front of our students. All right, so this is a huge issue because we're role modeling this negative behavior. That kinetic factor, that physical factor of kids actually seeing and watching that and normalizing that is desensitizing the fact that it's dangerous to them. All right, so it's really important to understand that there's many levels in a school district that we have to deal with, and our staff is a big part of that as well. We will be working not only on our student policy, but also our staff policy, and that is already made clear to those staff members that they are not allowed to use e-cigarettes on our campuses as well. The last thing I'd like to say is that I'm very much involved in a program called California YMCA Youth in Government. It's where a lot of youth come together in the state of California, and we, as a group, have a mock California. And we go through bills in the Assembly and Senate and use the actual chambers and what have you. I've been part of this program for about 27 years. I did it as a delegate in high school myself. I then became an advisor for that program. One of my students at that time in my delegation that brought up a bill was on not smoking in restaurants in California, which not long after became law in California. All right, this last year, I'm still program staff in that program now, and I can tell you it was a hot topic were e-cigarettes in that program. So when they debated bills in committee sessions and in the Assembly and the Senate, this was very hot, and they voted not to have e-cigarettes. The same type of laws we have now for tobacco prevention. So what I'm saying to you, if kids can see so clearly that this is dangerous for themselves, and they're advocating as citizens of California to not have this in place, you are all very educated people. Please do the right thing.
Thank you, Mr. Kordick. And if I could ask all of you to stay a moment, I would like to see if my colleagues have questions or comments to bring to you. Mr. Price? No? We're good?
Thank you.
One thing before you go, it's my understanding, and maybe you can confirm this, and I think the city attorneys can also, regardless of FDA-imposed regulation, it's up to the local municipalities to regulate use at the local level, regardless of an FDA report. Yeah, thank you.
That is correct.
Thank you so much. All right, what I'd like to do now is we're going to go to public comment, and whoops, we're waiting just a second. It was just taken out of, we have a few more. Okay. How did you just, we have it all organized?
Yeah, those in the front?
Uh-huh. Opposed?
I don't know, look right there.
Yeah, so. Yeah, we had it organized.
Right.
Between,
No,
okay.
it is.
Okay, so.
This is against.
Okay,
and
got
this
it,
is
perfect.
for.
Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. So what we're going to do is, because there are so many comments, I'm going to recommend that in the interest of fairness, we limit the comments to 60 seconds each. That's the way to do this, otherwise we'll be here all afternoon. So we're going to start with the following. And I'm going to call 3 names at a time, and that way we can get in the queue and you can make the most of your time at the microphone. And we're going to start with Scott Allen Schmidt, followed by Jeff Steer. Jeff will be followed by Alex Cruz.
Good afternoon, Chairman O'Farrell. Scott Schmidt, I'm a resident of West Hollywood, and if you adopt this ordinance, it will probably make me stay in West Hollywood more often and not go east of La Brea. After seeing friends of mine use electronic smoking devices in order to quit, I made the decision about a month ago to do the same and have successfully quit after 20 years of smoking by using e-cigarettes. It has, as a member of the LGBT community, LGBT people are more likely to smoke and use alcohol, and the use of anything that will help to quit is a good, is inherently good, I believe. I've heard the arguments about that we're talking about the denormalization of smoking, and indeed, it looks like smoking, and so it can be difficult. Like, I'll give you an example. I was in Zurich Airport, and I didn't know where to go to have my e-cigarettes, whether I should just have it there or go into the smoking cabin. I go in the smoking cabin, it was the only time I was judged for having an e-cigarette. So I urge you to oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. And so at the ready, we have Jeff Steer next, and if Alex Cruz could also queue up and be ready to speak, followed by Elaine Ruggieri.
Hi, I'm Jeff Steyer. I'm a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research, and my comments also reflect the views of the National Vapors Club, which are a group of cigarette smokers who quit smoking to use these products. We've heard all sorts of arguments today that outdoor exposure to e-cigarette use is somehow harmful, and that's simply not the case. As a matter of fact, studies have been published that show that e-cigarette exposure does not violate workplace exposure standards. And there are a number of studies which support that, including one very well-respected study by Igor Burstein. We've heard a lot about the precautionary principle. It's better to be safe than sorry. And I want you to please keep that message in mind when you regulate today, because there are unintended consequences of regulation. And the message may be that people who use e-cigarettes instead of smoking are doing something just as bad. We've heard all sorts of distortions about the data today. And I would caution you to keep in mind the unintended consequences of smokers staying smoking as a result of this type of regulation.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer. Alex Cruz, followed by Elaine Ruggieri. And I think maybe, is Alex Cruz not here? Elaine Ruggieri. And could Mayor Melian please stand and be ready to speak, followed by Step Jones.
Hi, I'm Elaine Ruggieri. I own Natural Vapes in West LA. My partner and boyfriend was a 3-pack-a-day smoker. He quit instantly due to electronic cigarettes. I can say firsthand, witnessing the number of people who come into our store and talk about how different their lives are as a result of electronic cigarettes. They can breathe, they can work out, they can walk. We shouldn't punish them as a result of the youth. I realize that that's a problem, but I'm a parent also. It's my responsibility to monitor my child, not an electronic cigarette store. They will get their hands on alcohol like they are every day, and they're going to get their hands on nicotine if they want as well. It's not our responsibility as a store owner. We do maintain an 18 or older. That is mandatory. We do ID, and we do respect that. We ask that you at least exempt the stores from the no smoking policy, that you do allow our customers to test out the product. All our testers are zero nicotine. It's very important we help encourage them. It's best for the environment. It is best for our kids and their kids that they stop cigarettes. And it's very important that we help them and we assist them with that. And somebody said earlier about what happens if a kid turns on or lights up an electronic cigarette in the school. You respond to that the same way you would if they lit up a joint or opened up a can of beer. You tell them it's illegal for them.
Thank you, Mr. Ruggieri. Next we have Mayor Melian. And if Step Jones could be ready. Is you, Mr. Jones, please come forward, and who will be followed by E Generation, who didn't leave a name, followed by Yong Kim. Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Honorable members, thank you for giving me this time to share with you what I'm doing in the community. My name is Step Jones, and I know some of you primarily on the board and city attorney through the charity work I've done over the decades. I have opened a vapor bar in Sherman Oaks, XOXO Vapor Bar. My clients come into the bar and vape different liquids with no nicotine to see what would fit them as the best alternative to smoking cigarettes. I am not here to talk about or debate the health issues of vaping, but the law which may prohibit my clients from being able to test our liquids at our store, which is 18 and older, and we card. Quite frankly, we cater to an older crowd, as you may hear Frank Sinatra being played in our store. Like a cigar store now, we would ask that we be allowed to let our clients continue to test our liquids and be able to decide what is correct for them. I invite you all to my store. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I think E Generation is not here. I think Yong Kim George is not here. Adam Farmany, followed by Glenn Lee, followed by Jen Clinton. Jen Clinton? I'm sorry, John, my apologies. Mr. Clinton.
That's all right. John Clinton, thanks for having me today. I happen to have tobacco background. I'm a scientist. Also, I'm a distributor of electronic cigarettes as an independent. So I'm not the big company. I just want to, since we only have a minute, I'm going to hit some things that are key. First thing is when the doctor spoke about secondhand smoke, he didn't talk about the rate of dissipation. So one of the things I wanted to share with you or recommend as you consider this is to take a pass and do a little bit more research. Vapor pens, the e-cigarettes, have nicotine levels from 0 to about 3.5, so we need to look at that. Also, the FDA is coming out with a comprehensive program on e-cigarettes. It's not done because of pending research. So more research is what I'm saying, guys. Thanks.
Next, we will have Darren Gold, followed by John Jenkins. Did I call you earlier, sir? Please step right up. So we need Darren Gold to stand and be at the ready, and John Jenkins to stand and be at the ready, followed by John Hardigan to stand and be at the ready.
Hi,
Sir.
my name is Glenn Lee. I'm the current owner of a Vape Source, which is a brick and mortar store in Los Angeles. As of now, I invested all my life savings into this business, which I strongly believe in. The products that we sell for reasons which you have heard today. I have a 3-year lease. I have 5 wonderful and passionate employees who are experts on electronic cigarettes and depend on me for their financial survival. I have a controlled store that strictly prohibits sales to minors and even entrance without adult supervision. We have signs and stickers all throughout our store that says no one under the age of 18, and we strictly enforce it every day. One of the strongest aspects of our business is that customers can sit down and test our different e-juice flavors that we sell, which equates to over 80% of our income, and by restricting customers to test will ultimately decrease the sale of our juices and in turn will cause financial hardship. If this ordinance is passed, which I strongly discourage, I respectfully ask on behalf of me, my employees, and all my other vape shops across LA that you include an exemption for age-restricted vape shops to the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Next, we have Darren Gold, John Jenkins, followed by John Hardigan, followed by Jack Kearney.
I apologize. I've never spoken in front of any kind of a council before or committee. So
Welcome and relax. It's no problem.
thank you. Please bear with me. I wrote this out. I'd like to thank you for allowing me the time to speak. My name is Darren Gold, and I am a real estate broker and property owner here in downtown Los Angeles. I'm also the founder of the Los Angeles Vapers Club, a social and networking group of over 200 members representing Los Angeles and surrounding cities and counties. I'm not personally involved in the electronic cigarette business, but I was a smoker for 27 years. And after numerous attempts to quit smoking using the approved and suggested methods, including the nicotine patch, nicotine gum, and nicotine lozenge, I was unsuccessful each time. On December 17th of 2010, I purchased an electronic cigarette, and I have been a non-smoker ever since.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. 5 seconds to wrap up.
I would like the council to reject including electronic cigarettes. However, if the committee chooses to vote in the affirmative on this ban, I would respectfully request that you exempt electronic cigarette shops where the products are sold.
Thank you, sir. We have to move on. Give everyone one minute. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sergeant. Give it to the sergeant, then give it to the clerk.
Thank you. And next we have Mr. John Jenkins, followed by John Hardigan.
Hello there. My name is John Jenkins. I own 3 vapor bars in Los Angeles. I've been an expert on electronic cigarettes since 2010. We opened the very first vape shop in the nation called the Vapor Spot. I think there's room to accomplish goals for both sides of this argument. I see the good intentions of the ordinance, but the facts it uses are simply out of context or out of date. I have a newer study, that's 2013, by the American Council on Science and Health. I'd like to submit this so you guys can also see some more evidence. By establishing a zero-tolerance ban on electronic cigarettes and treating them the same as smoke, this particular ordinance seems slightly flawed. Please allow me to propose some middle ground to illustrate how unreasonable this ordinance is as it's drafted. For instance, there's many places vapors would agree to restrict their use, and many things that are not addressed in this ordinance. Most vapors would be fine with restricting use of electronic cigarettes in government-run buildings and courthouses. We'd be fine with restricting the use of electronic cigarettes on public-run transportation, such as buses. And definitely restrict use of e-cigs on school grounds for students, restricting cells within 1,000 feet of those same schools.
Okay, sir, please wrap up. Your 60 seconds has come and gone.
I would like to wish that we had a little more balance with the time. But that being said, I wish that we could have some more consideration on the facts. Read this new report by the American Council on Health and Sciences. And let's see that the proposal is a bit rushed.
Thank you.
And we could use more time to
Thank you,
study
sir.
this.
Thank you. Mr. John Hardigan, and followed by Jack Kearney, followed by Charleston Cachilar. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm John Hardigan. I'm also a local vape shop owner. I wish Mr. Jenkins had had more time. He has a lot of good things to say. Let's talk science. A recent report by Igor Bernstein, who was mentioned by the first gentleman who stuck up here from BMC Public Health. Results of his study: there is no evidence of potential for exposure of e-cigarette users to contaminants that are associated with the risk to health at a level that would warrant attention. If there were involuntary workplace exposure, the vast majority of the predicted exposures are less than 1% of the total limited values. Less than 1% of what is allowed in the workplace for nicotine out of an electronic cigarette. Predicted exposures to acrolein and formaldehyde are typical, less than 5% total limited values. Considering the exposure of an aerosol mixture, et cetera, et cetera. My point is more study does need to be done before you can absolutely blanket and present what you have presented and a ban to the electronic cigarettes in all places. There is much more data out there, and most of the data that has been presented this afternoon has been a little bit flawed and a little bit one-sided.
Thank you, Mr. Hartigan.
One more thing I want to state. I agree with the idea of not restricting to vape shops.
Thank you. Next we have Jack Kearney, followed by Charleston Cachelar, followed by Joe Baxley.
Good afternoon. My name is Father Jack Kearney. I'm with the California Association for Alcohol and Drug Educators, who we accredit addiction studies programs and train counselors. I myself teach addiction studies at Loyola Marymount University and Cal State Fullerton. And I'm here to say that Katie and myself heartily oppose this ordinance because it's not based on science. It's based on press releases from the tobacco companies and from the pharmaceutical industry. If we look at all the science, clearly electronic cigarettes have helped millions of people quit smoking. We have more than enough science to say that they're 99 times safer than smoking. They pose no real risk to the user or the bystander. The people that are speaking for this ordinance haven't read all the science, that's all. And from what little they know, they're coming to the wrong conclusion. Very simple example, I had the honor of being with Councilmember Koretz on the radio recently. He expressed concern, like he did today, about children being exposed to this. Children who don't use tobacco.
Thank you, Mr. Kearney.
0.7%.
Thank
May I
you.
submit this?
Thank you. And the public comment card submission time period has ended. We have Charleston Cachelar, followed by Joe Baxley, followed by Brandon O'Neill. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Council. I represent 3 shops, vapor shops in LA, including Electronic Cigarette Convention, LLC. I have 37 employees, and restricting with this ordinance will hurt my business because, like all the previous people that said that a lot of people come in here to test our liquids. And another thing is we have a significant number of vapors that use zero nicotine. So with this ordinance, you're actually forcing them to vape, or to vape where places where they have to inhale secondhand smoke. So other than that, we also, at my stores, we also have signs that say 18 and over, but all my employees know to card people that are that look under 25. So I oppose this ordinance, and I hope you guys would unrestrict vape shops.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Joe Baxley, followed by Brandon O'Neill, followed by Jason Perez.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Joe Baxley. I represent myself along with my partner, Ced Moses, and 213 Incorporated, a nightlife development and management company downtown LA. We own and manage over 10 bars downtown, and we attract over 1 million customers a year. These are bars and restaurants, but primarily bars, over 21 environments where photo ID is required. We believe that private businesses should have the right to make their own rules on this matter. I do understand the concern about keeping these products out of the hands of youth, but I'm talking about 21 and over places, and we feel that that is a safe environment for this product to be used. Much has been made about the enforcement issue. It is very easy to tell the difference between these new electronic cigarette products and traditional cigarettes. Most of them have lights on the end of it. Most, if not all of them, have lights. The smoke is a different consistency and so on. Thank you for letting me speak. I would urge you guys to carve out an exemption of this ban to allow the use of e-cigarettes in restaurants and bars, at least those that are 21 and over establishments.
Thank you, Mr. Baxley. Thank you.
And thank you.
And we have Brandon O'Neill, followed by Jason Perez, followed by Amber Lee.
Hi, my name is Brandon O'Connell, and I represent Vape DLA and Vape Talk. We, over at Vape DLA, we card everyone that comes in at 18 and over, make sure to come to our bar and try everything out. And we also have like a free publication that's going to be online for people to download as vaping etiquette, which is, I think as a community, we can actually take care of all these problems within our own community. And we won't actually be needing your guys' help, or you will have to send any laws to make us not vape where we're not allowed to or we're not welcome. I think as a community, we'll be able to take care of it ourselves. And thank you guys for letting me speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Jason Perez, followed by Amber Lee, followed by Manuel Suarez, Jr.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Jason Perez. I am a licensed commercial insurance broker with Calco Commercial Insurance Services. We are the program directors for product liability, risk management, and loss control program for this industry, the vaping, e-cigarette, e-juice industry. Our stance is that this is a fully vetted product as far as risk management is concerned. It is a safer alternative, which I think has been stated here, to traditional tobacco use. And we back the industry in a responsible manner to use these products and disseminate them to the public 18 and over only, as is law, according to 2010 in California by then Governor Schwarzenegger. We also encourage that further studies be done in order to vet this product's safety, as is currently being done by the FDA and is backed by Mitch Zeller, the director of the Center for Tobacco Distribution and Products. We want to stand behind the vapor ban only to be exempted in shops and lounges. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Amber Lee, followed by Manuel Suarez, Jr.
Hi, my name is Amber Lee, co-owner of Vape Revolution in Cerritos. Currently, we contribute around $30,000 to $40,000 a month in sales tax revenue. We also hire 60 employees and another 25 in our store opening pretty soon. Not being able to vape indoors is going to affect our business because juice tasting is important to the sales process. I think the main question is why vapors have to vape in the smoking section. I feel like the entire vaping industry was created to give people a chance to have another choice other than smoking cigarettes. Don't we have the right also not to be around secondhand smoke, especially since smoking and not being around secondhand smoke is the sole reason why we are vaping. Also, I feel that our industry is a part of our recovering economy. We create jobs, and we are reasonable and business owners that offer health insurance, dental, retirement programs to our employees. Therefore, I think we should be in a more positive light. Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
You bet. Thank you. Manuel Suarez, Jr. And then we're wrapping it up soon, folks, followed by Ruben Gonzalez, then Paul Hirsch.
Hello, Council. How you doing? My name is Manuel Suarez, Jr., owner of Golden State Vape Shop in Los Angeles, California. We pretty much here because if you put this ban, it's going to affect our business. We came to the conclusion as far as smoking e-cigs, it was a better alternative than smoking cigarettes. I've been smoking cigarettes for 24 years. Everyone that we cater to is pretty much senior citizens, police officers, EMTs. We're really trying to get people off the cigarettes when it comes down to it. I understand that the misconception with people that do not use these products, they look at it like this is not like dispensaries at all, and I'm pretty sure that that's what the people are looking at it to be as. We're really trying to do the right thing. We came from nothing. We in America, we really trying to live the American dream, and for you to try to take that away, I feel like it's unconstitutional.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thanks.
Mr. Suarez. Ruben Gonzalez, followed by Paul Hirsch, followed by Marlene Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ruben Gonzalez. I'm here on behalf of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce.
One of the most difficult actions and powers that a city government or any government has, its ability to regulate. Because when you regulate, you're balancing between individual liberties and the public good, and I realize how difficult that is. But we really should only make those decisions when we have the facts or the evidence in place to make those decisions. And I would argue that here you don't really have that. Just because you assert something doesn't make it true, and frankly, the evidence and science out there is not completely, the jury's still out on it. So what you need to look at is, no one disagrees on making sure that this is an adult product, but you have to look at how you make sure this is an adult product. Because adults, when they want to use these products, and businesses, when they want to be able to provide these products to adults, should be only limited as is necessary. And until we have the ability to see how that impacts public health truthfully, we should not be limiting the abilities of adults to make decisions or businesses to serve adults. So please, would ask you to keep that in mind as you move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Paul Hirsch, followed by Marlene Gomez, and followed by Martha Needleman. Mr. Hirsch, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Hirsch. I am a high school principal of the Science Academy in East Hollywood. I come before the committee to express how deeply troubled I am about the increased use of e-cigarettes amongst young people. It is a fast-growing trend. There has been a lot of debate about the devices, but what is not in question, what is indisputable, is that these devices do not belong in our schools, nor should they be in the hands of minors. And yet, the CDC reports that e-cigarette use amongst young people has doubled within a year. There is something very sinister about an industry that is directly targeting young people, marketing a nicotine product with flavors like chocolate, gummy bear, and cotton candy. It's just wrong. Local, state, and federal government has made so much progress decreasing cigarette use by minors and adults. Tobacco use is almost a non-issue in our high school campus. My concern is that e-cigarettes are going to walk back years of progress in fighting nicotine use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Marlene Gomez, followed by Martha Cox-Niederman.
Good afternoon. My name is Marlene Gomez, and I'm the Advocacy Manager for the American Lung Association. First, we want to commend the Los Angeles City Council's action to protect public health of LA residents by including e-cigarettes in smoke-free air laws and continuing a legacy of leadership in this area. We are very concerned that very little is known about the health effects of electronic cigarettes and of the emissions that they release. Initial studies, as mentioned earlier, have found formaldehyde, benzene, and tobacco-specific nitrosamines, which are cancer-causing chemicals, coming from the secondhand emissions. So it is clear that there's still much to learn about these products, but it is also clear that it is much more than just water vapor coming from the emissions from e-cigarettes. In California, 44 jurisdictions have already included e-cigarettes in their smoke-free air laws, of which 11 are in Los Angeles County. We urge you to move forward on this ordinance and vote for it as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gomez. Thank you so much. Martha Cox-Niederman, followed by Robert Chernow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Martha Cox-Niederman. I'm the Vice President for Public Policy for the Building Owners and Managers Association. Building managers have been contacting us regarding complaints lodged by tenants about the use of e-cigarettes in tenant suites and common areas. Because current law does not cover e-cigarettes, it places the burden on building management to force a ban as a building policy. As you know, some e-cigarettes contain chemicals in addition to nicotine. Further, the FDA has not sanctioned e-cigarettes as a cessation device, and no regulation is being placed on their usage or production. On behalf of the building owners and managers of over 300 commercial high-rise buildings, we support the effort here to limit the use of these devices until more is known about their effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Needleman. We have Robert Chernow, followed by Esther Schiller, followed by Evelyn Znaimer.
Good afternoon. I came before this chamber over 20 years ago when we were first battling to get restrictions on smoking. We were very pleased that Los Angeles was one of the first cities in the area to enact laws that a lot of the businesses said was going to affect them. We're hearing the same rhetoric again. Most of the speakers today are, in fact, businesses who seem more concerned on their profits than they are with the health of non-smokers. Clearly, this is just a new ploy to get the products out. We see the same things. Before it was cartoon characters to attract children. Now it's flavorings. We're asking the city of Los Angeles to once again restrict the use of another form of tobacco and protect the rights of non-smokers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chernow. Esther Schiller, followed by Evelyn Znaimer, followed by Spencer Lyons.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Esther Schiller. I'm a retired school teacher. I was injured by tobacco smoke in my classroom many years ago and have been working on this issue ever since. I am horrified to see this whole thing starting again, and especially horrified that the emphasis is being placed on children. Scientists tell us that the brains of children are not fully matured, especially in the area of decision-making. So it's no surprise that kids are taking up e-cigarettes because they are the thing to do. I'd like to suggest, for those who are using electronic cigarettes, that a rose by any other name is still a rose. If you've given up smoking regular cigarettes in favor of so-called vaping, have you really freed yourself from your addiction to nicotine? And also, the Surgeon General's latest report says that children's brains are especially injured by nicotine addiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schiller, and thank you for your years of educational teachings. Thank you. Evelyn Znaimer, followed by Spencer Lyons, followed by Janice Bofo.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Evelyn Znaimer. I am the newly elected city clerk of South Pasadena, comprising of about 26,000 registered voters, many children, and several pregnant mothers. South Pasadena has a comprehensive anti-smoking ordinances in multifamily dwellings, duplexes, condominiums, city-owned buildings, parks, restaurants, outdoor dining, and including farmers market. But we do not have any ordinances against e-cigarettes and other electronic tobacco products. My father was a World War II veteran and one of the few survivors of the Pearl Harbor bombing. He did not die fighting wars. He smoked for 50 years and was addicted to nicotine. E-cigarettes contain nicotine. He died of complications, COPD, pneumonia, and a heart attack. By passing this motion today, you will close that gateway to renormalize smoking, and you will not undermine our city's effort to ban smoking in designated places. We look to your great leadership, and we in protecting the public health welfare of the residents of the Los Angeles City County and also its visitors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Znaimer, and congratulations on your appointment as City Clerk of South Pasadena. Spencer Lyons, followed by Janice, I think it's Bofo, and I'm sorry, I'm butchered your name, my apologies, followed by Murillo Mireles.
Good afternoon, Chairman O'Farrell, members of the committee. My name is Spencer Lyons with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. The Cancer Action Network is committed to protecting the health and well-being of the citizens of Los Angeles. As such, we support the proposed amendments to the Los Angeles Municipal Code to revise the definition of smoking to include e-cigarettes and other electronic smoking devices. The health effects of e-cigarettes, as we've heard today, are scientifically uncertain. Currently, only a limited number of studies have been done to examine the contents of cigarette vapor, and there are serious questions about the safety of inhaling the substances in e-cigarette vapor. In addition, allowing the use of electronic cigarettes devices in public places where smoking is otherwise prohibited can create confusion with enforcement issues, and there are concerns that it may create new tobacco users and reverse efforts that have made smoking socially unacceptable. Other cities have taken this important step to prohibit use of e-cigarettes in places where smoking is otherwise prohibited, and we encourage the City of Los Angeles to do the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. And we have Janice, and I think it's Bofo.
Yes,
thank you. My
thank you.
apologies for so mispronouncing your name.
Oh, no problem.
Followed by Murillo Mireles, and lastly, Eric B-A-I-C-H.
Good afternoon. My name is Janice Boafo. I'm here on behalf of Tarzana Treatment Centers, one of the largest behavioral health care organizations in Southern California. We treat tobacco-related disease and disability as well as nicotine addiction amongst the spectrum of other services that we provide. And I'm here because 40% of cigarettes are consumed by people who have a substance use disorder or mental illness. So it's an issue that's on our hearts. It's important for us because we also work to protect other vulnerable populations, such as youth, pregnant women, and those with health disparities. So those great gains that we've had in tobacco work in some communities or in California don't necessarily reflect the health disparities, the access and the availability to youth in communities such as Council District 7 and other communities who are suffering from tobacco. And while the potential health consequences associated with the use of e-cigarettes haven't yet been fully researched, early data shows that e-cigarette emissions do have carcinogens and toxic chemicals, which may result in additional potential harm to the public. As behavioral health providers, we have seen a disproportionate jump in the use of e-cigarettes among youth and adults that we serve. This rapidly growing trend with the potential for great harm has a potential for great harm, especially when e-cigarette use is being combined with butane hash oil, or BHO, which is often readily available in local dispensaries, vape lounges, and online. We support the City of Los Angeles in its effort to prohibit the use of e-cigarettes anywhere smoking is currently prohibited.
Thank you, Ms. Boafo. Murillo Morales, followed by Eric B., I'm going to say. My apologies.
Hi. My name is Adrian. I'm going to be translating for Ms. Morales.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Marilu Mireles.
Good afternoon. My name is Marilu Morales.
Como madre me preocupa que haya una gran cantidad de jóvenes usando,
Like a mother, I am concerned of a great amount of youth using e-cigarettes,
los cuales solamente están adictos a una gran industria que los ofrecen a nuestros
which they
adolescentes,
are addicted to a big tobacco organization,
como cigarrillos electrónicos con nicotina líquida ofreciéndolos en sabores.
with electronic cigarettes that contain high levels of nicotine with different flavors.
Puesto que no hay regulación de estos productos por la administración
There is no regulation by the FDA.
de alimentos y medicamentos. Los cigarrillos electrónicos contienen mucha ancha variedad de niveles de nicotina.
Electronic cigarettes contain a large amount of nicotine,
Y esto nos preocupa a nosotros como padres por lo adictivo.
and this concerns us, the parents, because of the addictiveness.
Y es dañino para la salud.
It is dangerous for the health.
Let's add 30 seconds for the translation. Please wrap up.
Nosotros como padres debemos transmitir un mensaje consistente
We as parents, we need to transmit a consistent message,
y no inflexible, y por eso agradezco
and for that I am grateful
a los representantes de nuestro concilio
to the representatives of this committee
que nos apoyen a prevenir a nuestros jóvenes que sigan usando y siendo manipulados por la industria tabacalera.
for supporting this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, señora Morales. Gracias por venir. Gracias. Eric B., sir.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I see that my second grade teacher would kick my butt that my penmanship wasn't good enough. My last name is Batch, Eric Batch, and I serve as the Vice President of Advocacy for the American Heart Association.
You're very kind. I think it's my eyesight. But anyway, thank you.
And I'm here to express the AHA's strong support for the draft ordinance. Our reasons for support are similar to what you've heard. Vapors from e-cigarettes contain known toxins. The use of e-cigarettes has potential to renormalize smoking. And these products propose a potential threat to law enforcement. I do want to touch on one thing that was said earlier. E-cigarettes have not been subject to thorough independent testing, so users cannot be sure of what they're actually inhaling. And while I saw you got studies, it's important to remember that these are pro-industry science groups that will also tell you that, there's nothing wrong with fracking, consumptions of sugar-sweetened beverages, or the harms of BPA. So I want you to keep that in mind. The final thing I'll say just in reframing this debate is that we're talking about an unregulated product with unknown health risks and entering that into an already smoke-free environment. And for that reason, we urge you to include e-cigarettes in the definition of smoking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batch. Thank you. That concludes our public testimony. And before I wrap up this item 1, I would like to know if there are any comments or questions from my colleagues.
I just have one. Yeah, I just
Mr.
got
Price.
one. There's some discussion about the FDA report. Any idea when that report's going to be coming forth?
If I can base it on the information that I've
Yeah,
read.
I think, sir, I think we need to have staff to the table for this one. Thank you. I know that, let me just say this, I know that a report has been pending since 2009, and do we have the CLA in the room?
Hi, Deputy City Attorney Selena Porras for the
thank
people.
you.
Oh, sorry. I actually said for the people because I thought I was in court for a second. I apologize for that. The FDA, as council member stated, has indicated since 2009 its intention to regulate. They have not given a specific date as to when they are going to do that, and they keep missing deadlines every quarter, so we do not know when that'll happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Fewer, thank you. Do you have anything to add? I want to make a few comments, and then I'm going to have a suggestion here. And e-cigarettes clearly are not risk-free products. They are not recognized as smoking cessation devices, and their appeal toward youth is increasing cause for concern, as use among middle and high school students has doubled between 2010 and 2011. There is nothing more important that we can do on the Los Angeles City Council as elected officials to protect the health and well-being of our youth and the general public in the workplace and outside the workplace. People using e-cigarettes in indoor and outdoor environments where smoking is restricted have the potential to reverse decades of denormalization of smoking, making it appear that smoking is acceptable. In the absence of scientific consensus, the burden of proof that vaping, so-called vaping, is not harmful should fall on those engaging in the activity. We do not know what the long-term health effects are, although the industry marketing of the product implies that these products are harmless. It is not just water vapor. The City of Los Angeles finds that the public health and safety of its citizens, in particular its youth, is being endangered, potentially endangered, by the lack of comprehensive regulation of the sale of e-cigarettes. We will not turn our backs on those of you who worked tirelessly on California's smoke-free workplace laws until more is known about these products, limiting their use in public indoor and outdoor areas in Los Angeles, the same as we regulate tobacco, just makes common sense. Colleagues, our partners at the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health and organizations such as Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, LAUSD Superintendent Daisy, school board members Zimmer and Kaiser and the others, Beyond the Bell Program, Building Owners and Managers Association of Greater Los Angeles, Keck School of Medicine of USC, the Tobacco Education and Research Oversight Committee, American Lung Association, and American Cancer Society stand beside us on this matter. I am going to ask for your aye vote, but I am going to ask for an amendment, and the amendment is as follows. I would like to request the city attorney amend the proposed draft ordinance to include parallel exemptions for the use of electronic smoking devices at so-called vaping lounges, in keeping with similar uses for cigar lounges or hookah lounges, and the exclusion of theatrical production sites similar to the exemptions that already exist for smoking of tobacco at locations used for production filming for the entertainment industry for theatrical purposes only. Therefore, I move that the committee approve non-substantive technical revisions to the final draft ordinance that the city will transmit to City Council.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that.
Yes, sir.
I think it's a reasonable approach. It's certainly not an easy, well, let me back up. We certainly are sensitive to the health concerns, particularly amongst those under the age of 21. I think, though, until we do have some more definitive studies in the public domain from FDA that carving out these exemptions are certainly supportive of the business community, and I think also sensitive to the health concerns that have been raised earlier, and I would support that.
I call the question. Oh, Mr. Labange.
You got something you want to say, Joe? Nope. You're good? I just want to let people know the only motion picture company that does not show smoking in any way is Disney. In this movie this year, Saving Mr. Banks, Walt was a smoker, but they didn't show him smoking, but they did have smoke coming from. I just wanted to credit Disney. I've seen more smoking And I tell you, when I was a young guy at 17, nobody smoked like Humphrey Bogart. And it was pretty wild. And my wife doesn't listen to me in city council, so I can say my girlfriend at the time, but she loved that scene, but it's not a good scene. I do understand what Mr. O'Farrell stated on that. I just want to be cautious to encourage the film industry to continue the practice that Disney has set off on, to not glorify smoking in motion pictures. But I think this is a step in the right direction. And also let people know that because some people win, some people lose today, you always can come back if there's other facts. And I know our city attorneys are always open to that as well as you go forward. But just as out of the blue is this new concept, that is after so many years, since 1964. And I know Dr. Fielding, as I complimented him earlier, it's the one public health issue that this country has really changed its way on since 1964, when I remember, were you born in 64, Joe?
74.
74, okay. So I remember on the street that I lived on because, so you remember on the street when this came out, people would speak about it, and yet we have changed our pattern. I would hate to see us. And also I worry a little about sometimes people smoking marijuana on public streets, Mr. City Attorney. I believe if they need the medical marijuana, they should do it within the confines of their own home. And I do hear that some marijuana gets to junior highs faster than it did when I was at King Junior High in the 60s. So that being said, just wanted for the record and look forward to the full discussion in City Council. We thank our city attorneys on this side and our visiting city attorneys on this side.
Yes, thank you, Mr. LeBons. Mr. Buscaino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership, and thank you to all of you who came to speak on this issue. I can clearly say this. I personally am not a fan of smoking. I don't like seeing it. I don't like smelling it. And I don't like being around it. I've spoken to my kids about it. Just last night, I spoke to my 10-year-old son and have educated him about the dangers of smoking. Tobacco use remains a leading preventive cause of death. And hearing your testimony clearly today, e-cigarettes are not tobacco, and I don't think they should be regulated exactly the same way. It's one thing to seek moral conformity, but another to identify harmful effects. Without conclusive evidence that secondhand vapor from e-cigarettes is harmful, I don't believe we should be in such a hurry to put so many restrictions on where adults can use a legal product. I'm anxious to continue this. I look forward to continuing this dialogue and this discussion as we move this issue forward to the rest of our colleagues at City Council. And with that, Mr. Chair, thank you again for your leadership, and thank you all who spoke for and against this ordinance, or this draft ordinance, rather.
Thank you, Mr. Buscaino, and I want to thank Mike Fuhrer for all of your work in the office, working again. Thank you for testifying and coming in person today on this very important issue. And just to restate, I propose the amendment to exempt so-called vaping lounges, and I'm moving the question. So it carries.
Under 21, right? Over 21, right? On the vaping lounge.
The restrictions for vaping lounges would follow exactly like they do hookah lounges or cigar lounges. The same exact conditions.
State law is 18.
State law is 18.
For tobacco stores, correct.
I think it should be older, but I'll follow state law because I don't want to cause the city attorney extra work.
This action carries to the City Council. Thank you. And lastly, we have item 3. Item 3 is going to go very, very quickly. Madam Clerk, if we could read item 3.
Item 3 is a motion from Council Members Buscaino and Cedillo requesting that the Board of Recreation and Parks Commissioners concur with directing the City Attorney to prepare and present an ordinance to amend Los Angeles Municipal Code Section 63.44.B.14, parentheses C, to add the John Melky Flores Park to the list of parks that close at sunset and open at sunrise and other related actions.
Move to approve.
Thank you. I'd like to move that as a consent item, and I see no objections. It carries. Thank you, and this meeting is adjourned.